That's
right. Trey's in the right position.
Yeah, that's right. Pretend like you know what you're doing here.
Yep, exactly.
Should I go ahead?
What's that?
Should I go ahead?
Your mic's on.
Not yet. I'll tell you.
Lucille's very, very diligent with the time.
She is. Thanks for the snacks, Clotilde.
You're so welcome.
It's dinner time.
The time is now 6 o'clock. Chair, would you please call the meeting to order?
The Rent Appeals Board meeting of October 3rd, 2024 is now called to order. I would like or invite Jenna to start us off with the roll call.
Thank you. And actually, just real quick, before we do the roll call, I wanted to mention that we have a new member, Anna Mitsunuga, who unfortunately was unable to make it here tonight because of a pre-planned vacation, but I know she's tuning in from wherever she is. And she sent me a little note to share with the board and the community. Hello, Jenna and board members. I am very glad to have been appointed to this board and look forward to meeting more of our board members and serving our community. Thank you for this opportunity. With
Awesome.
that, I'll hand it over to Clotilde to do the roll call for tonight.
Thank you. Roll call is as follows. Chair Taylor,
Here.
Chair Davis, Board Member Davis,
Present.
Chair Raymond,
Present.
Board Member Kirby.
Here.
Board Member Misanaga is excused absent.
I have to read an acknowledgement now. The City of Rohnert Park acknowledges indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land. Let it be acknowledged that the City of Rohnert Park is located within the traditional homelands of the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria, comprised of Coast Miwok and Southern Pomo peoples. Please, all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. Okay, and then acknowledgement of posting of agenda. The agenda posted in a minimum of 3 public places: Community Center, Public Safety Building, and City Hall.
Yes, Chair, it was.
Okay. Public comment. This is comments on items not listed on the agenda. Do we have any public comments for it? Not listed on the agenda.
We have no public comment at this time.
Okay. Consent calendar. Approval of the meeting, the minutes. That would be for approval of the draft minutes of the Mobile Home Parks Rent Appeals Board meeting of May 2nd, 2024. And do we have a motion to approve them?
Yes, I second that.
And a second.
I second it.
Is there any discussion? Since there's no discussion, then those who favor the approval? Motion? Say aye.
Aye.
Excuse me.
What?
So was a motion made?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a vote?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it was made by Taylor, seconded by Davis.
Okay. And the roll call is as follows. So Vice Chair Kirby,
Aye.
Chair Raymond,
Aye.
Board Member Taylor,
Aye.
and Board Member Davis.
Aye.
The motion passes with 4 ayes, 0 noes, and 1 excuse absent.
Okay, and then item 8.2, consider adoption of a resolution to establish registration fees for 2025. Questions after staff. Does the board, well.
Oh, that'll be, yeah.
It's it's your turn.
Yep. Are you ready for me to give the presentation?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right, so every October, we have 2 items that come to the board. And the first one is determining the annual general adjustment for the upcoming calendar year. The annual general adjustment, or AGA, is another way of saying the allowable rent increase for each year for any of the spaces in the city that are on rent control. So as a little bit of a reminder, the ordinance that governs this is the Mobile Home Park Ordinance in the city's municipal code. That was an ordinance that was approved by the voters in 1987, and it set out the rules and the calculation to determine how much rent increase mobile home park owners are allowed to increase for applicable spaces throughout the city. So this does apply to all rent-controlled spaces, which are spaces in mobile home parks that are on month-to-month agreements. It's established each October, like I mentioned. It uses the Consumer Price Index, which is an index that determines that, reports on inflation year over year from August 2024, with a maximum cap at 4%. Now, some of you will remember a couple of years ago, we had 2 years in a row where the CPI was actually well over 4%. We had one year where it was 8.5, one I think it was over 6. I know we have it in front of us somewhere. 5.8, and then 8.7 were 2 of the years a couple years ago. And because of the mobile home park ordinance that's in place, those capped at 4%. This will go into effect February 1st, 2025. And you can see the little picture I have there at the bottom shows you how easy it is to find the mobile home ordinance. If anybody's curious about where to find it, this is the city's Rohnert Park Municipal Code page, and it's chapter 9.70. Whoops, that's jumped ahead. So history of the AGA, I include this in the staff report, so you've got this chart in front of you. Every year we do a 10-year look back to see what the difference has been. So you can see back in 2021, 2022, those were 2 years where inflation was really high, and we ended up hitting that 4% cap. Last year in August, it was 2.9, and this year, the maximum increase that mobile home park owners can increase rent on folks in rent-controlled spaces is 1.9%. So just to walk through this a little bit for folks who are curious about this calculation, the CPI index, which is there on the left, that shows, that's the starting point for everything. What we're looking at is what's the difference between this year's number and last year's number. And so you can see the difference between that 308.640 and last year's number. It's the next one over, which is the 7.089. Okay, what does that mean? The percentage change is that 2.351%. We round it to the nearest 1/10 of 1%, and then you take 0.5 off of that. Now, you may be wondering where this whole calculation comes from, and it is all hard-coded in the mobile home park ordinance. So the entire calculation that we use every year, all I really have to do is get that first number, and then I've got a calculator that spits that out all the way across. So with that, the staff recommendation is to adopt Resolution 2024-03 to announce the annual general adjustment for the maximum allowable space rent, which will be effective on or after February 1st, 2025. And I'll hand it back to you, Chair.
Okay, does the board have any questions, comments for staff at this time? Before we request these things of staff first, one of the things that Jenna and I had discussed is that if you want to make a question of staff, you should go through the chair and request that you question the staff. So does anybody have any questions of the staff? Anybody? Well, that was easy. Do we have any public comments?
No public comment at this time.
Okay. Then I should request that we have a roll call vote.
You'll need someone to make a motion first.
Motion.
Motion. Yeah, do we have a motion?
Yes, we have a motion to carry forward what has been presented by staff.
Well, then, since we didn't have any questions of staff, I feel it within my duty to request a roll call vote on the item.
Roll call is as follows for the resolution. Vice Chair Kirby,
Approve.
Chair Raymond,
Aye.
Board Member Taylor, and Board Member Davis.
Aye.
The motion passes with 4 ayes, 0 noes, and 1 excuse absent.
Okay, that would take us to number 9. Are there any matters from the board?
Sorry, Chair, we actually have an item 8.2.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Consider adoption of a resolution to establish registration fees for 2025. Does the, okay,
Shall I take it over?
staff, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair. So this is the other item of business that happens every October as well, because the registration fees, the difference in the registration fees usually get put on the same notices as the rent increases for everybody. And the checks are due to the city from the mobile home parks themselves on or before February 1st. So as a little bit of a refresher, the registration fees are how the board funds its business. It only applies to rent-controlled spaces. So any spaces that are on annual leases or are not subject to rent control would not be paying into this, but they also don't benefit from the mobile home park ordinance. The timeline, so in October, that's right now, the board sets the registration fee for the upcoming calendar year, so that's 2025. In November, although we try to get these out a little sooner too, staff sends out invoices to all the mobile home park owners. These are really kind of a two-parter document. We send out documents to all of them saying, here's how much you owe to the board on behalf of the number of spaces in your mobile home park that are on rent control. So it's the annualized fee times the number of spaces. Here's the amount that you're allowed to increase your rent in the upcoming year on your anniversary date. And also at the same time that you submit your check, you need to submit your re-registration monitoring. And that's a form that we have them fill out that allows us, the staff on behalf of the board, to confirm that they are increasing only to the maximum allowed on all the spaces, and following some other terms of the mobile home park ordinance. The remainder of the year, so the mobile home park owners pay for the registration fee for the entire park up front, and the rest of the year they're recouping from the residents that are in rent controlled spaces. So they break it out to a monthly fee that they are recouping. As a little reminder with our budget timeline, so the February is when the registration fees are due, like I mentioned. April, sometimes May is what we did this last year, is when we do the budget study session and adopt the board's budget. And then July is when the new budget year starts. So our budget cycle or fiscal year is July 1st through June 30th of the next year. And then October is when we set the annual general adjustment, which the board just did just now, and set registration fees based on the prior fiscal year's actual expenses. So we're going to do a little look back at last year's actual expenses, because that'll be the number that we use to determine what the registration is going to be for 2025. So this is a look back at fiscal year 2023-2024. So that started on July 1st of 2023 and went through June 30th of 2024. As of the end of that fiscal year, so that's June 30th of this year, the total cash in the bank for the board was that $242,430. Of that, the board has set aside $100,000 for reserves. That's money that the board specifically designated to be set aside for specific purposes, could be used to cover tenant petitions, unanticipated operational expenses. But for the most part, the board's saying we really don't want to have to touch this unless we really need to. And then the remaining fund balance, which is really the difference between that top number minus the reserves, that's $142,430. Those are the funds available to cover the regularly budgeted expenses. Actual revenue, green is for revenue. So you'll remember we have landlord petitions. So we always put in there the landlord, we budget a landlord petition on the revenue side, and we budget for landlord petitions on the expenses side. That's to make sure that if a landlord petition were to come in during that year, which it hasn't for several years now, but if one were to come in during that year, we would have the line item already appropriated to be able to move forward with that. Now, important thing to note, landlord petitions are paid for by the landlord, which is in this case the mobile home park owner. So if they put in a petition, they have to provide a deposit up front. They have to pay for all of the costs associated with managing that petition, processing that petition. If they ever get below a certain amount, then they have to replenish it. So that's why we've got a revenue and an expense, and they offset each other. We had no landlord petitions in fiscal year 23-24, which is why you see the actual column at 0. On the registration fees side, we had budgeted $68,939. Our actual was $28,036. Just something to bear in mind here, the registration fees, when we budget them, you might remember this, we just did this in May. The budget amount is always a projection. It's based on what the budget is from the prior fiscal year, but then the actual is going to always be based on what the end of that year ended up being. So we're kind of looking back a little bit. So what we collected in registration fees in February 2024, earlier this year, was actual expenses from fiscal year 22-23. And now we're looking at setting the registration fees for 2025 on actuals 23-24. So that's what we collected there. And then in interest, we had budgeted $2,200. We actually collected about double that. And that's just cash in the bank. So it exceeded our budget projection. So the total revenue collected by the board in fiscal year 23-24 was at $32,437. And then actual expenses. So you'll see, we budgeted, again, that offset for the landlord petition. That's the expense that's offset by the revenue. There were no landlord petitions. There were no tenant petitions. The total amount budgeted for staff expenses was $45,000. The total that was actually spent was $27,192, which was just development services staff time administering the board's business. And then total operational expenses was budgeted as $376, but we didn't end up spending any of that. So our grand total ended up being that $27,192, which is the number that we're using to set the registration fee for 2025. Are there any I'm going to pause right there. Are there any questions about the budget from 23-24?
Not so,
Please speak into your
not
mic.
so much about 23, 24. I'm going to tie this into the rent increase. You provide historical data per year. Is it possible to get historical data for the registration fees for the past years? For example, what total staff cost was, what the registration fees were? And you don't have to go back a gazillion years, because there were a few years, I think, we didn't pass any of those registration fees on to mobile home park owners, especially during COVID. But it would be nice to see some historical data on that also.
Right. Yeah, if I may make a suggestion through the chair, I'm really close to being done with the presentation. Maybe I can finish this and then the board can deliberate and give direction if they would like that specific information. I'm happy to provide it.
Fine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jenna.
And actually, this ties in really nicely with this next slide. Thank you, Jan, for the setup there, which is how we calculate the registration fees each year. So you take that number, and I actually put it down to the penny there so we could be really precise. The actual amount spent in the prior fiscal year, you divide it by the total number of expected rent-controlled spaces in 2025, and that gives you the annualized number for the annual registration fee per space. And that's due on February 1st, 2025 from the mobile home parks. Now, what that's going to look like to people living in these spaces each month is a charge of $1.90, so $1.90 per month. I'm pretty sure, I'm going off of memory, but I was just looking at this. I'm pretty sure this year was 193, so we actually saw a little bit of a reduction. Part of that is due to a slight reduction in the total expenditures year over year, but some of it is also due to an increase in the number of spaces on rent control over the prior year. This number, by the way, 1,190, is the total number that was reported when we did the re-registration monitoring earlier this year, and we had them fill out these very detailed forms so that we could monitor and ensure compliance with the ordinance. And that does take me to my final slide, which is the recommendation to adopt Resolution 2024-04, establishing the registration fees for mobile home park spaces in 2025. The board is definitely welcome to deliberate and provide staff direction if they would like a little bit of additional information. That can, that does not get in the way of you proceeding with this, of course, but I'm happy to follow up with the board and provide some additional documents.
Does the board have any questions or comments for staff at this time?
Only the one I made, at least for me, requesting some historical data on staff expenses and et cetera, just extrapolating it a little bit like we do on rent control increases.
Okay, anybody else?
Yes, staff, I was wondering, one year I know that we maybe paid forward, I don't want to use the incorrect terms, but some action took place during COVID, which allowed us to help the residents. Is something like that possible, Chair, staff?
Staff?
Let me answer that. So yeah, there were a couple of years, for folks who remember, in 2020, the board made two changes. It changed its fiscal year. It had been on a fiscal year cycle that was January through December, which was different from the rest of the city, meaning it didn't line up very nicely with the city's financial software system. It made it difficult to run reports. So the board moved over, to the financial software system and the same fiscal year as the city. And at the same time, the board changed how it calculated registration fees. So in the past, the board had calculated registration fees based on the projected number for the upcoming fiscal year. So if I go back a couple of slides, you see that budgeted amount in the first column at the bottom, 115,376. In the past, the board would have taken that amount and divided it by 1190 to come up with the total cost per space. And you can imagine how much more expensive that was. And it did result in the board, getting a good cushion in your bank account, which the board decided during some of the tougher years, especially with COVID and frankly with inflation, those couple of years where it hit 4%, the board decided to cover all of the upcoming costs in the upcoming fiscal year with fund balance, meaning that, they were, not getting any revenue for the upcoming year. But starting last year, the board started collecting that again.
Okay. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Chair. No more questions.
Okay, then do we have any public comments on this item?
Come right up.
Thank you.
Please come up to the podium.
Please.
We like questions.
And press the button. There you go.
It's on.
Can you hear me? I can't hear me. Thank you for that question. It did clear up some stuff, and I'm curious on how often that cushion gets used in other areas through the city.
Staff?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that question. I'm going to go back a few slides. So the money you see the cash in the bank there, 242,430, that is restricted to Rent Appeals Board. So that is your bank account that's restricted only to the activities of the Rent Appeals Board. So it is not allowed to be used for any other purpose other than to do the business of the Rent Appeals Board.
Okay. This may be off topic, but for other areas that have renters, is that off topic? Instead of a mobile home park? My question is,
Is this regarding like apartments or?
apartments,
I don't think we can handle that, can we?
I think it's off topic.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking the question, though. But yeah, unfortunately, the focus of this board is pretty focused on just specifically implementing the mobile home park ordinance. But happy to talk offline. Emily and I both are with the Housing Division. We'd be happy to talk after the meeting if you have questions about housing more generally.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And do we have any other public comments on this? Okay, then I call for a motion to accept the resolution. Do we have a motion?
I motion to accept it.
A second?
Second.
I second that.
Roll call on the motion is as follows. Vice Chair Kirby,
Aye.
Chair Raymond,
Yes.
Board Member Taylor,
Yes.
and Board Member Davis.
Yes.
The motion passes with 4 ayes, 0 noes, and 1 excused absent.
And Chair Raymond, if you wouldn't mind, before we leave this topic, can I get a little bit of clarity and direction from the board about what information you're looking for me to provide? I have a couple just quick questions. I'm happy to provide it. Just want to make sure I'm getting the right scope here. So
Yes.
yeah, the request was for historical data on staff expenses and on what was charged for registration fees in prior years. How many years back are you requesting?
Jan, would be your,
How many years back can you go? I mean, you've gone back as far as, 2015 on the space rent.
Mm-hmm.
So is it unreasonable to ask you to go back that far? Or or?
I think it would be, the staff expenses will be trickier to get anything before when we move to fiscal year. So we moved to
Oh, okay.
fiscal year in 2020, 2021, and that's all stuff I can get from one easy report. The stuff before that, this was the reason we moved, is kind of choppy. So that would be easy to go back to then. For registration fees, that's all set in, resolutions. That'll just be a little research exercise. So I can certainly go back a little further. If you wanted to go back 10 years, we could do that.
Well, I'm just wondering, is that just cost effective to be spending your time on that? Because I don't believe that it is personally.
That's a question for the board.
I think, I tend to agree with you, depending on how far back. I mean, just go back to where it's cost effective, not, I don't expect you to go through files out in the, God knows where those files are,
They're actually up there. We'll talk about them in a minute.
Oh, they're not digitalized yet?
So,
In process.
Yeah.
so I just had a question. I was just trying to figure what, to the point of requesting this, what are we trying to ascertain?
Staff?
I'm sorry, I don't think I quite understood the question.
What are we ascertaining by gathering this information on past costs? What are we trying to determine at this point?
Can you address that, staff, or should we?
I think that's a question for.
Jan, yeah.
I think it would just be interesting
Just to, yeah.
to just see the past, but not go so far back that it becomes cumbersome
Right,
for staff or
Right.
digging through files, and that's not cost effective. We're not talking about
right,
a ton of money here.
right, exactly.
I just feel that Jana's time is well spent if it's just for interesting. I mean, I just don't see what's the point?
If it's easy,
Well, perhaps then what we can do is start when we changed, or when went in order with the rest of the city and changed the fiscal year. That would probably be the easiest way and the less expensive way to handle that.
well, and here's a really stupid idea, but I probably have my monthly space rent bills
I have
from
my,
2005.
yeah,
So I could probably pull one of them per year, and I could figure what our registration fees were for that year.
I think I have
could do
from
that, which would probably be
2018.
faster than and easier than what you would have to go through, and I don't mind doing that.
Staff, if I may add something here. The problem with that is that we don't have from your records, we don't have the data regarding the number of people that were on rent control all those years and those who were not on rent control.
Right.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, I mean, we had we did have the projected numbers for each year, and really, the staff report, you probably know, doesn't change much year over year. It's just some of the numbers change, but like the general structure of it's more or less the same. So it's a matter of just going back and pulling all those staff reports. If I may suggest to the board, I can commit to going back 4 years. And if it's easy to pull a couple more on the space rent, I'll pull that together too, but not if it takes too much time. Because you're right in assuming I will, I bill my time to the board when I'm working on board activities, and so we do want to be sensitive to that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so that
Does that
is
work
what
for-
you'll do, at least
Does that work for everybody?
Yeah,
for
Head nods is fine for this.
yep,
Jan?
yeah,
good?
works for me.
Okay,
Yeah.
there you go.
Okay, great. Are there any more matters from the board? Okay, the staff, do you have anything that you'd like to bring up?
I do have a couple of things. We only meet twice a year on a regular basis, so we got to take advantage of it, right? One kind of cool thing I wanted to share with the board, which you'll start to see on your budget next year, because we're doing it this year. But we've started translating just the agenda, not the full packet, but just the agenda into Spanish as well. And we've been posting the agendas in both English and Spanish in all of the places that we do public posting. We did that starting for this meeting, as well as in all the mobile home parks. So hopefully folks who live in mobile home parks saw that posted. A bunch of people, your property managers and owners, got back to me and said that they were going to post it in the clubhouse and elsewhere. And this is really, both part of an effort citywide to be a lot more inclusive, and also an acknowledgement that we do have a lot of folks that are more comfortable in Spanish, or maybe monolingual Spanish speakers living in mobile home parks. So just a kind of a cool thing I wanted to share. Second thing I wanted to share on the file update, and yes, I heard the little comment. So that is still happening. The files are technically here at City Hall upstairs. And for anyone who's tuning in and doesn't know what we're talking about, this is the project of getting all of the files from, really it's from the last 37 years since the board's been in operation, going through them all, sorting, organizing, purging the stuff that's, older and doesn't need to be saved anymore, and then the stuff that's long-term files, getting those digitized. So that work is still in progress. There is a lot of work that has been happening, many thanks to Clotilde. She's been doing a lot of, reviewing and getting rid of the stuff that's duplicates and ready for destruction. But, the work is continuing and getting everything organized so that we have, for example, all of the agendas and the minutes that are signed and the resolutions that are signed going back to the beginning of time. So that's, a project in and of itself. So there's kind of these mini projects within the bigger project. But we hired a new office assistant, Brenda Gamma, who started with us a few months ago, who we've started using this as an opportunity to train her on how we do file digitization. And also, and this will lead me into my next and final, I'm going to ask Emily Quigg to introduce herself. Emily Quigg is the second half of the housing division team here at the city, and I am training her on rent appeals board stuff, and she's going to be taking charge of the file project as well. So I'll hand it over to Emily just to introduce herself.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I've seen you all on recordings, so it's nice to actually see you in person. Like Jenna said, I'm 50% of the housing division. My title is Homeless Services Coordinator, so that's usually the realm I'm working in, but Jenna's training me on some of our housing activities, including the Rent Appeals Board. So thank you all very much for your service and for letting me join this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, do we have any public comments for items not on the agenda? Okay. Then the next regularly scheduled meeting would fall on Thursday, November 7th, 2024.
Excuse me, Ms. Before we adjourn, I'd like to thank the people who did come to this meeting.
Yes.
Even if you had nothing to say and you just wanted to hear, it's great that you show an interest in being here. We really appreciate it.
I read it in the boards that you were having it on mobile home parks. I just wish more people that live in mobile home parks would say that tonight.
I agree. We encourage your neighbors. We don't meet as often as, for example, the city council. If we have nothing to discuss, we don't meet. So it could be twice a year, it could be 5 times a year, depending on, but you can always find it on the Rohnert Park City website under Meeting Central. It will list the meetings. It will tell you when they're coming up. It won't give you an agenda, but it will tell you when, and also they're on TV, on channel 26.
So is that the one where you can hear you guys talking in the picture?
Yeah.
Excuse me, Vice Chair, an agenda will be posted when a meeting is scheduled.
And also just a little quick note, since we're I think we're doing items from board, but if I can sneak in on there, we actually have an email subscription list. And if you sign up on the city's website, so rpcity.org, and Clotilde will know, exactly where to sign up. You'll get an email every month from Clotilde telling you if the meeting's been canceled or if we have a meeting. So that's a great way to stay informed.
If you care to leave your email address with me, I can sign you up for that constant contact.
Okay, before I adjourn the meeting, I also would like to thank everybody for coming. The meeting is now adjourned.